These were real men. Jesus was a real human being. These disciples were real fishermen and tax collectors, and they walked on dirty ground, and they struggled, and they had doubts, but it was a real world of flesh and blood and mud and water.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
Leslie, welcome back to Focus.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here again.
And you are the world traveler. You're just coming in from Italy and you're heading back to Alaska real soon.
Yeah, by way of California.
Man, did you ride a whale all the way from Europe?
That would have been much more fun than that
I don't
airplane.
think so, actually. But yeah, it's a long trek.
Yeah.
You know, so much of Scripture has the analogies or is based on some kind of maritime reference. I mean, it was the ag fishing business was the business of the day. That was our Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Back then. And when you look at that, you're making it so relatable, and you help people better understand those stories. But speak to those of us who maybe have never been fishing up in Alaska. Maybe we've seen the cable show here and there, but it looks grueling. But what's it like to be in that environment, fishing, the water, all of that metaphor? What do you see as the big picture statement there?
Well, first of all, you have to know. See, when we read the scriptures and we read the Gospels and these stories of the fishermen out in the disciples out in the boat crossing the sea, and they get in this big storm, and there are two like big storms, in the Gospels, and Jesus comes to them walking on water, and the other one Jesus calms the storm. And here's what happens. I think when we read those stories, we feel like we know them. If we've been in church grew up in church. We've heard these stories over and over, and we tend to just kind of reduce these stories to, a neat little package with a nice little spiritual message at the end, But I'm here to tell you that the water that Jesus sailed on, the Sea of Galilee, that water is very wet.
Like most
and the
water.
mud and the dirt that he walked on from village to village around the Sea of Galilee is very dirty. And as a commercial fisherwoman who lives in Alaska and works out on the water with my hands on fish and slime and gunk, it's real, it's physical. What I'm trying to say is that we spiritualize the Gospels. We spiritualize those stories, and we forget these were real men. Jesus was a real human being. These disciples were real fishermen and tax collectors, and they walked on dirty ground, and they struggled, and they had doubts, but it was a real world of flesh and blood and mud and water. And that's what Crossing the Waters is about. I want to help us take it out of this sort of fairy tale spiritual world.
Yeah.
Make it real and physical and bring it close.
Well, and for you, being in the industry, that's got to be, you make those connections. You feel it because you've been there, that tactile connection that you've made, holding a slimy fish. And
absolutely.
Being in that environment.
It's not just my heart that knows it or my mind that knows it, my body knows it.
Right.
And that's what Crossing the Waters I hope to do, is take people out on the water, let them get wet, let them experience the Gospels the way the disciples did.
Talk about Duncan, your husband, how you guys got into this business of Alaskan fishing, how your 6 kids grew up in that environment, some of the lessons that you saw them learn. What was that like?
Yeah. So my husband and I met in college in Ohio, and we married while we were in college, and he is from Kodiak, born and raised, and his parents began fishing in 1961. So he grew up in the boat, in the skiff, grew up fishing. And when I married him, I knew this was a package deal. That
Meaning?
I was marrying not only Duncan, I was marrying Alaska. I was marrying commercial fishing. And he truly was this huge package deal. At the time, I was 20. I really didn't get it, what I was sort of getting myself into.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New Hampshire.
Well, they've got some fishing there.
Not that I never held a fish
kind,
in
huh?
my life until I got to Kodiak. So, but I was really up for it. I was up for an adventure, and I really felt the Lord sort of calling me, if you will, into this marriage and into this new life. And my husband was very forthright. He flew me up before we were married.
That was nice.
Yes.
Just take
all the
a
way
look.
out to fish camp. I was there for a week. And you know what we did every day from sun up to sundown, which the sun hardly goes down?
You fish.
You fish,
Exactly.
right?
We worked like
That sounds so romantic.
we worked like slaves, and it was perfect because that was our life. That was my life. Commercial fishing for salmon, we're salmon fishermen, is really grueling. It's hard work, and this year will be my 40th season out there.
Yeah.
So I've done it for a long time. I've raised my kids out there. They just like their father have grown up in the skiff from the time they were 4 or 5. They start going out. They don't get paid though until they're 6, and then they're on a pay scale.
Well,
all
that's
the way
nice
through.
of you.
Yes.
Can't wait till I'm 7 so I get paid.
Exactly.
Now, you vowed to Duncan that even probably this whole package deal you're talking about, I know what I'm getting into, but you always said yourself you were never going to fish together. Now, A, why would that be the case? What did you see that was going to be the problem? And B, did you ever fish together, and what happened?
No, actually, we had planned to fish together. That was the master plan. And this is in the 70s. Do you remember the unisex 70s?
Yeah,
when
vaguely. I was small.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I forgot. You're
I was
younger
junior
than I
high
am.
in high school then. So.
Okay, but anyway, you remember, John.
Oh, sure. I look older. I do remember the unisex 70s, yes.
When men and women did everything the same.
It's all interchangeable.
It's all interchangeable. And that's how I grew up. I grew up building houses. I grew up working, doing men's work.
In New Hampshire?
In New Hampshire.
Wow, okay.
That's what we did. We restored old houses.
Okay.
So
You were made for this Alaska
yeah,
venture.
yeah. So that was our plan. We're going to work together in the skiff. Okay, and we did this for the first 3 years. But let me just give you a little snapshot of how that went.
Okay.
So when we step in the skiff, there's usually 2 or 3 people that work together in the boat.
The skiff, by the way,
Is a boat. It's a
how big?
It's about 28 feet.
Okay, so not a rowboat.
It's
bigger
not a
than that.
rowboat. It's bigger than that. It has a outboard on it, a 60-horse outboard on it, but it's an open boat, right? And but the guy running the engine is the skipper, and the person in the bow is the crewman. So husband and wife, we stroll together down to the skiff. We've got our rain gear on. The minute we step in that skiff, we are no longer husband and wife. We are skipper and crewman.
How did that work?
Not well. Okay.
Took you 3 years to figure that out?
No. I figured that out I figured that out the first week. But my husband wasn't quite ready to go there. So imagine, okay, we're out in the open ocean. We live in a very stormy area. We have big seas, big storms, and the person in the bow, the crewman, does a lot of the heavy lifting, the heavy work. So we get out in storms, and I'm not 6 feet tall and 250 pounds like all the other crewmen. I'm my size.
I qualify. I could go do this.
You could do this.
I see it in your future, Jim.
Wow, I am excited.
Crewman, not skipper. Crewman.
And so when things were going badly, let's just say there was a little bit of yelling going on. There's a little bit of screaming going on. And at the end of the day, we'd climb out of the skiff in our rain gear, trudging up the hill, exhausted. And Duncan would put an arm around me. He's my husband now. And he would
He's
say,
no longer the skipper.
"So, how you doing, Leslie? How's how's everything going?" And I'd say, "Don't even touch me." Like, I can't compartmentalize like that. He can.
Right.
I cannot. I am still your wife in that skiff.
Your
and
white
you,
brain matter is connecting all the dots. You can't treat me that way in the
Yes,
skiff
you
and this way on the
can't yell
land.
at me.
Well, now we're getting into marriage metaphors. I mean, how many of us are skipper and crewman or crewwoman?
Oh, absolutely. And it just doesn't work. On shore, we work everything out. We're partners. In the boat, there's this hierarchy. And that's why we don't fish together anymore.
Well, how did you translate that into other areas of your relationship? How did you and Duncan talk about that? This is just something we're not going to do because it creates too much tension between us.
Yeah.
What would you counsel other couples who struggle in certain areas, maybe not fishing together, but name the activity?
Oh, just even a family business, right? Working
Right.
together in a family business. And there are times, I think it just depends a lot on the personalities involved. If it's hierarchical, that can be difficult. But sometimes very clearly one person has this expertise, the other person has that expertise, and you can join the two together and work very harmoniously. But not everybody can do that. We couldn't do that in fishing in the boat. In other areas, we do it very well.
Right.
So I think you just have to be honest. What is this doing to our marriage? Is it strengthening our marriage, or is it kind of eroding our marriage?
So talk it through.
Absolutely.
That's a great learning out of this whole thing. So
Yeah,
that's important.
it was.
Leslie, your kids are growing up in this environment. You had some great stories in the book about that as well. And one that caught my attention, I think, was your son. I don't know how old he is. Fill in the gaps here. But he went out for a fishing expedition, was getting sick, and you and Duncan had a difference of opinion on how to parent at this point as
Yes.
skipper and crewman.
Exactly.
What happened?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is my youngest son. He was 9, and my other son is there as well. He's 11, and Micah tends to get seasick out in storms. So it was pretty stormy, and he was sick, and my mother's heart sees him sick, and I think we should take him ashore. I want to take care of him. And my husband's cure is for him to keep working.
Good old dad.
Yeah.
So
Keep it going.
If it's not bleeding, just keep on working.
if he's not dying, he
Right,
can
there you
still
go.
work.
That sounds like an Alaskan fisherman.
That's pretty much how it is. So we have this conflict. I'm Micah. Lie down, take it easy, and Duncan's like, keep going, keep working, and Duncan finally just kind of yells at me to shut up. Sit down and shut up. And this happens often. This kind of tension that I feel between being a mother, a nurturing, loving mother, but also being a fisherman. And also knowing that there are fish out in those nets. We've got to get the fish out. Our family livelihood depends on this.
Well, and that's an interesting point. I mean, the tension, a lot of people are gasping, saying, how could the two of you speak to each other like this? And because, in our modern world down here in the lower 48, it's going off to work at 8 o'clock,
Right.
and we're not having to clear the nets within a few minutes in order for the fish to be sellable. And all of that context. Talk about that kind of tension in the moment and the way you roll with it. Duncan's trying to drive everybody for the family business to make sure you got food on the table, you're making the mortgage payment. I mean, that's all running through his head as he sees
Exactly.
fish in the net.
Right.
Describe that battle.
Right. Yeah, it is a battle, and it's not that it's immediately solved, at any point. We just deal with it as it comes. And it's been 29 years now that we've been raising children out there. So it doesn't go away. But there are times when I have to let go of my mothering, nurturing self and just let Duncan take the lead and let Duncan do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me ask this question then. For many of us as parents, it is an issue of safety, bicycle helmets, all that kind of thing. You must see the rest of the world and go, what is going on? Talk about overprotection. Where is that balance for you guys? I mean, you're in rough seas. Your kids' lives are actually on the line sometimes, I'm sure. how do you wrestle through all that? Where's that line of safety and precaution for you guys?
Yeah. This is something I have that's been a part. This issue has been a part of my life now for 29 years, for as long as I've had children, and I think I know more of the story now than I did 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, because I see my kids at the other end. I see them, what these years of intense labor and even times of danger and incredible responsibility.
What are those attributes that they learned?
They are very hardworking. They don't bat an eye at work. They are fearless. They are courageous. My daughter at age 22, just graduated from college, went down on her own to live in El Salvador and teach theater out in rural villages by herself. There's
That's courage.
Probably not many 22-year-olds who are able to do that. So my kids they've faced death, they've faced storms, they've faced unending work and exhaustion, and they persevered.
They're tough kids.
And they persevered. And I see that perseverance in them as one of their central character traits. And I look around me at parenting, at what's going on in parenting now, and I see parents who really so protect and coddle their children and shelter them from disappointment, from pain, from hard work. And I think you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake.
You're actually setting them up for failure.
You're setting them up for failure. If you want them to be strong and to be deeply rooted, there's gonna have to be some tough wins. There's gonna have to be some wins that strengthen them.
Leslie, as you're talking about I'm still stuck on the captain, or the skipper rather, and the crew. Jesus had a bunch of fishermen. So who was the skipper of the boat when they were out on the waters?
Well, and by the way, most of us think, okay, there were 4 fishermen disciples. There were probably 6. Probably half of the disciples were commercial fishermen, which is very intriguing, which is kind of what led me, to write this book. I imagine they probably fought over that.
Well, that's what I was kind of picturing as you were describing your time in the boat with Duncan, that somebody's got to be a clear leader. Maybe not always.
Well, Jesus was asleep at one point.
He was, and
probably Peter strikes me as the guy who.
Well,
wanted
he's
to be
the
the
natural,
skipper.
but
but they're 4 brothers. They're 2 sets of 2 brothers,
Right.
and they would have all grown up in fishing the way my kids did, and they would have learned it from their father. Their father's older now, so he's not in the boat anymore. What's the arrangement? Who's probably the eldest? Probably whoever is the eldest brother. That's what I would imagine.
And that would have fit with that
skipper.
culture as well as the current
That's right.
culture of fishing up in Alaska,
Yeah.
right?
still,
Same
I can
things
just
are
hear
true.
Jesus trying to mitigate all of that. No, I want to be this. I want to be the skipper.
Yeah, I think he just said, "I'm going to take a nap."
And he called them away from the nets. He called them away from that kind of hierarchy and that kind of authority structure. And, one of the reasons I think Jesus chose fishermen is because they already knew how to work together. They were communal. They worked in a fishing business there were not only 2 families, and they were also hired men, just like ours, and they all work together. So there is this very communal aspect to fishing that they already knew how to do that.
Yeah. I would think, in fact, in your book, you talk about wanting to make that quest to Israel to find the real gospel, which I think is very interesting. And in sharing that vocation as a fisherman and your family doing that, you had to make some incredible connections there, like you're mentioning right now. What other illuminations did you have comparing your Alaskan fishing enterprise with the disciples and Jesus as many times as a fishing community?
Yeah, there are just so many connections. I can't say them all, but I want to let me paint a picture for you. Just this moment of insight that gives us a little more understanding of a story we think we already know. And so, let's get out on the Sea of Galilee, which, by the way, I hope I'm not going to destroy people's images, but it's actually a lake. And, it's not a real sea. It's a lake, right? So,
but they can have
big one.
Big chop. And
they
big
can
storms.
have a big chop. In fact, toward the end of the 3 weeks I was there, it had been completely calm. And I just started praying for a storm. Like, I was having doubts.
You wanted to see it.
I cannot believe that I see a lake here. I cannot believe that there's going to be fishermen, right, who are out on that body of water who think they're going to die.
Right.
What? So I said, Lord, you got to show me a storm here. And so finally,
You asked him for that.
I did. I was praying for days. Lord, show me a storm.
There's some poor Galilean fisherman who's going, why was that lady praying
You
for
ruined
this?"
his day.
And so it came. The last 2 or 3 days I was there, here came this storm. And just like it says, imagine that, just like it says in the Gospels, it came up very quickly. And suddenly it went from flat calm to big waves, surprisingly big waves, given the size of the sea. And the minute those waves come and the wind comes, all the boats get off the water.
Right.
And I imagined people out there, okay, they don't have an outboard. All they have is oars. It's human-powered. There's no Coast Guard to call them and rescue them. There are no life jackets. So you get out there in the middle of the storm, and you're in trouble. And these guys were in trouble now. The boat is all the disciples are there. The Gospel of Mark says that the waves are sweeping over the boat. And you know what that means? That means that if you don't you want your boat to sink, you got to keep the bow into the waves.
Right.
Okay, the waves and the wind are so strong, they cannot keep the bow into the waves. So they are now sideways. And that's why the waves are sweeping over the boat. The boat is filling with water.
The most dangerous position.
The most dangerous, the most vulnerable position possible. So the guys they're on the oars and they're going to sink, and they know it. They're going to die. And there's Jesus sleeping in the stern. Okay, but there's one more piece to this. The Gospel of Mark tells us that Jesus was sleeping on a cushion. That's weird. That's a weird detail. But it's very likely that cushion was a buoy. And that buoy was a buoy for the sea anchor. And that's what you throw out in a storm to give you some stability in the waves. So not only is Jesus asleep while their boat is filling up with water, but he's sleeping on the only thing that might possibly help them.
Right. A little dilemma for the disciples.
Yes,
Do
yes.
we wake them
Do we wake 'em up?
Do we get the anchor? Yeah.
And of course they didn't wake them until they thought they were going to die. But here's the thing. I think if they had known who Jesus was, they didn't know who he was at that point. They would have awakened him much sooner. If they had known that he was Lord and Master over those waves and over that wind, they would have awakened him the moment they felt fear instead of waiting until they were about to die.
Yeah.
I honestly think that when they finally woke him up, Jesus, don't you care that we're dying? I think they woke him up to take a turn at the oars.
Huh.
I think that's probably
Really?
what they were, because they don't, how could they know? How could they know that Jesus could calm the seas and stop the wind?
Right. It hadn't happened yet.
It hadn't happened. They hadn't seen anything like that before. I think they woke him up because, hey, it's your turn on the
Right,
oars.
right.
Give us
That's
a break here.
And he said, I'm not going to do that, but what I'll do is just calm it all down.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yes.
Leslie, this has been so good. There is so much more we want to get to. You even talk about how the disciples dropped their nets. I want to start the program next time with that analogy, being a fisherman up in Alaska, how fishermen never walk away from their nets. Yet the disciples did. Let's save that for next time.
Okay.
If you can come back,
All
and
right.
let's pick it up there.
All right.
And talk about these things that you learned applying your background in fishing to the disciples' experience. Let's do it.
All right.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.